The 6-year-old girl's sob came out so loud that the woman in the front row flinched, but Dean Martin's voice cut off faster. The note died halfway through, the microphone frozen at his lips. The orchestra played 2 more measures before the violinist looked up and realized Dean wasn't singing anymore. Wait, because what Dean did in the next 45 seconds at that children's hospital charity event broke even the 2 hardest men in the room, Wayne and Sinatra included. And nobody knew why that child was crying until Dean set the microphone down and walked to the edge of the stage. The ballroom at the Ambassador Hotel that Thursday night in October 1963 held 200 people who'd paid $1,000 each to sit in tuxedos and gowns and pretend they weren't checking their watches. The MC had announced a 45-minute set before the charity auction would begin. Dean had 20 minutes left to make them care enough to open their wallets. Dean Martin was halfway through Everybody Loves Somebody when it happened. He'd been holding a long note, eyes half closed the way he did when he wanted the room to feel like he was singing just to them. When the sound cut through everything, a child's sob, raw and uncontrolled, the kind that comes from somewhere deeper than tears. His mouth stayed open for half a second. The microphone picked up his breath, but no sound. The orchestra kept going because they were professionals, and professionals don't stop unless the conductor tells them to. But the pianist's left hand stumbled on a chord, and the drummer's hi-hat went silent. Dean's eyes opened all the way and locked onto the center table, 3rd row from the stage. The little girl in the wheelchair had her hands over her face, and her whole body was shaking. Frank Sinatra, sitting 2 tables to the left, put down his drink. John Wayne, right next to him, leaned forward with both elbows on the white tablecloth. Neither of them said a word. The woman next to the child, her mother, you could tell by the way she was leaning in close and whispering, looked up at the stage, and her face went pale when she saw Dean staring. Dean lowered the microphone from his lips, didn't hand it off, didn't set it in the stand, just let his arm drop to his side while it was still live. You could hear him breathing into it, short and shallow. The conductor finally turned around, baton frozen mid-air, and the music died in pieces. Strings first, then horns, then drums. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. Someone in the back coughed. A fork clinked against a plate. The little girl kept crying. Notice what's happening in the room right now, because the next choice Dean makes will define everything that comes after, not just for him, but for everyone watching. Dean took 1 step forward, then stopped. His free hand came up to his chest, fingers spread like he was trying to hold something in place. Look at what happens next, because this is the part nobody expected. He didn't walk off. He didn't signal for help. He just stood there at the edge of the stage, 6 feet above the floor, staring at that child like she was the only person in the room. The mother was trying to turn the wheelchair around now, trying to get the girl out of there, but the space between tables was tight, and the wheels kept catching on chair legs. The girl's sobbing got louder. Dean's jaw tightened, his Adam's apple moved, but no sound came out. Wayne started to stand. Sinatra put a hand on his arm, and Wayne sat back down, but he didn't look happy about it. Here's what you need to understand about Dean Martin before we go any further. The man everyone saw on stage, the casual drunk, the guy who couldn't care less, the smooth operator who treated every show like a cocktail party. That wasn't a mask. It was a carefully constructed buffer between himself and the thing he'd spent his whole career trying to outrun, the moment when he'd have to choose between keeping the show going and doing something that actually mattered. He'd built an entire persona around never having to make that choice. And now, in front of 200 people and the 2 hardest men in Hollywood, the choice was staring him in the face from a wheelchair. The question wasn't just what he'd do, it was who he'd be after he did it. The girl's mother finally got the wheelchair turned. She started pushing it toward the side exit, moving fast, her heels clicking on the hardwood. The girl's hands were still over her face. Dean watched them go, His breathing into the microphone got faster. Notice something here. The room was dead silent except for those clicking heels and that child's crying, but Dean still hadn't moved. He was locked in place, like his feet had been nailed to the stage. The microphone in his hand started to tremble. Just a little. Just enough that if you were close, you'd see the silver catch the light in tiny shivers. The mother reached the side door. She had one hand on the push bar. The door was about to swing open and take them both out into the hallway where nobody would see, where nobody would have to know, where the show could just continue like nothing had happened. That's when Dean moved. He turned to the orchestra. "Give me a minute," he said into the microphone. His voice came out rough, like he'd swallowed sand. The conductor glanced at his watch. 18 minutes left before the auction was supposed to start. Dean saw the look, but didn't care. He set the microphone down on the edge of the stage, carefully, like it was made of glass, and he walked to the stairs at stage left. The room stayed silent. Every eye followed him down those 4 steps. His shoes made no sound on the carpet. He crossed the floor between the stage and the center tables, and you could have heard a pin drop. Sinatra and Wayne both turned in their seats to watch. Dean walked past them without looking. His hands were in his pockets now. His shoulders were up around his ears. He reached the mother just as she pushed the door open. His hand came up and caught the edge of it. "Wait," he said. Not into a microphone this time. Just out loud, in the quiet. The mother froze. She looked at him and her eyes were red. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "She got overwhelmed. I should have taken her out sooner." Dean looked down at the little girl. She lowered her hands just enough that he could see her face. Tears on her cheeks. Eyes squeezed shut. Her dress was pink with white lace, and there was a small stuffed rabbit in her lap. Something about the way her hands were curled told him this wasn't just about being overwhelmed. This was something deeper, something he needed to understand before the night was over. "Hey," Dean said, soft, almost too soft to hear if you weren't right there. The girl opened her eyes. "Wait, stop right here and understand what's happening, because the next 60 seconds are going to explain why the people in that room talked about this night for the rest of their lives." Dean crouched down, slowly, like his knees hurt. When he was eye level with the wheelchair, he took his hands out of his pockets and rested his forearms on his thighs. "What's your name?" he asked. The girl didn't answer, just looked at him with those wet eyes. "My name's Dean," he said. "I was singing up there, and I heard you crying, and I thought maybe something was wrong. Is something wrong?" The mother started to say something, but Dean held up one finger. Not rude, just a gentle, "Give me a second," and she went quiet. The little girl's bottom lip trembled. "I wanted to clap," she said. Her voice was so small, "but my hands don't work right, and everyone was clapping, and I couldn't." Dean's face didn't change, but something happened behind his eyes. Something that made Sinatra, watching from 20 feet away, later tell people he'd never seen Dean look like that before or since. "Can I tell you a secret?" Dean asked. The girl nodded. "Half the time when I'm up there singing, I'm so nervous my hands shake. You see this?" He held out his right hand. It was steady now, but he said, "Before I go on stage, it shakes like a leaf, every single time. You know why?" She shook her head. "Because I care so much about doing it right that my body forgets how to be calm. And you know what I figured out?" "What?" "The shaking means you care. It means it matters to you. And that's not something to cry about. That's something to be proud of." The girl looked down at her hands. They were curled tight, fingers bent in ways that made it clear they didn't straighten easy. Dean felt something shift in his chest as he said those words out loud, like he'd just made a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Not to her, but to himself. "You want to know another secret?" Dean asked. She looked back up. "The best applause doesn't come from your hands. It comes from right here." He tapped his chest, right over his heart. "And I heard yours loud and clear. The girl's face did something complicated. The tears were still there, but her mouth curved up at the corners, just a little, like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to smile yet. Dean reached out and touched the stuffed rabbit. This guy got a name? Mr. Cotton. Mr. Cotton. That's a good name. Dean stood up, knees cracking. Through the open door, he could hear the murmur of the crowd, restless, wondering when the show would continue. He had maybe 10 minutes before the whole night fell apart. He looked at the mother. You mind if she comes back in? I'd like to finish the song, and I'd like her to hear it. The mother's hand went to her mouth. She nodded. Dean looked back at the girl. You going to be okay if we go back in there? The girl nodded. All right then. Dean stepped aside and held the door open. The mother pushed the wheelchair back into the ballroom. The room was still silent. Every head turned to watch them come through. Wayne and Sinatra were both standing now. Dean walked behind the wheelchair, hands in his pockets again, and he didn't look at anyone as he made his way back to the stage. Remember this. Remember the way 200 people in evening wear sat absolutely still while a man in a tuxedo escorted a crying child back to her seat. Remember the way John Wayne's jaw was set so tight you could see the muscle jump. Remember the way Frank Sinatra's eyes followed Dean all the way back to the stairs. Dean climbed back up to the stage, picked up the microphone, turned to the conductor. Let's take it from the bridge, he said. The conductor raised his baton. The orchestra came back in, soft at first, then building. Dean closed his eyes and found the note. His voice came out clear and strong. No tremor, no hesitation. He sang the rest of Everybody Loves Somebody, like nothing had happened, except everyone in that room knew something had. When he hit the final note, he held it for 4 beats. Then he opened his eyes and looked straight at the little girl in the wheelchair. She was watching him. Both hands were pressed flat against her chest, right over her heart. The room exploded. Not polite charity gala applause, real applause, the kind that starts as a roar and doesn't stop. People stood. Chairs scraped back. Wayne was on his feet clapping so hard his palms had to hurt. Sinatra was standing too, hands together, face set in something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't far from it either. Dean didn't bow, didn't wave, just nodded once, set the microphone back in the stand, and walked off stage left while the applause kept going. Backstage, he leaned against the wall and pulled out a cigarette. His hands were shaking so bad, it took him 3 tries to get it lit. A stagehand asked if he was okay. Dean nodded and took a long drag, eyes closed. There it was, the cost of choosing the person over the show. His body was paying it now, in tremors he couldn't control, in the tightness in his chest that wouldn't ease. But when he thought about that little girl's face, the cost didn't seem too high. The applause finally died down out front. The MC took the stage and announced a 15-minute intermission. People started moving, heading for the bar, lighting cigarettes, leaning close to whisper about what they'd just seen. Sinatra found Dean backstage about 4 minutes later. Didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the dim hallway with his hands in his pockets, watching Dean smoke. Out in the ballroom, the MC was stalling, telling jokes nobody laughed at, trying to fill the dead air before the auction started. That was something Frank finally said. Dean took another drag. Yeah. You okay? No. Sinatra nodded. Silence for a few seconds. Then her face when you came down those stairs. I thought her mother was going to lose it. She almost did. What'd you say to the kid? Dean looked at him, told her the truth, which was that caring enough to shake is better than not caring at all. Sinatra studied him. You believe that? Dean dropped the cigarette and ground it out with his heel. I have to. Wayne appeared at the end of the hallway, walking slow, still in his tuxedo, but he'd loosened his bow tie. He stopped next to Sinatra, looked at Dean. Hell of a thing you just did, Wayne said. Dean shrugged. Wasn't much. Wasn't much, Wayne repeated. not agreeing, just saying the words back like he wanted to see if they sounded as ridiculous out loud as they did in his head. You stopped a show in front of 200 people to talk to a kid in a wheelchair. Most guys would have kept singing. Most guys aren't worth much then, Dean said. Wayne's mouth twitched. Might have been the start of a smile. Hard to tell. You going back out there for the second half? That's the job. You need a drink first? I need about 4. Let's make it 3, Sinatra said. You still have to sing. They walked together to the private bar backstage, the one reserved for performers and VIPs. Dean poured himself 3 fingers of scotch and drank half of it in one pull. Wayne had bourbon. Sinatra had Jack Daniels. Nobody talked for a minute. The ice clinked in the glasses. Somewhere out in the ballroom, people were laughing. But in here, something heavier sat between them, unspoken. That mother's going to remember this for the rest of her life, Sinatra said. That kid too, Dean set his glass down. Good. You know what you just did, right? Wayne asked. Made a fool of myself in front of Hollywood's biggest checkbooks. No, Wayne said. You reminded everyone in that room why they showed up in the first place. It wasn't to see you sing. It was to feel like they gave a damn about something. You gave them that. Dean looked at Wayne, then at Sinatra. Both of them were serious. No jokes, no ribbing. Just 2 men who'd seen enough of the world to know the difference between performing and actually showing up. I didn't plan it, Dean said. Best things never are, Sinatra said. The stage manager appeared in the doorway. 5 minutes, Mr. Martin. Dean nodded, finished his scotch, set the glass down, and straightened his bow tie in the mirror on the wall. His hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. He walked back out to the wings. The lights were already coming up on stage. The orchestra was settling back into their chairs. The audience was filtering back to their tables. Dean watched through the gap in the curtain. The little girl in the wheelchair was back in her spot, front and center. Her mother was sitting next to her now, one hand on the girl's shoulder. The stuffed rabbit was still in the girl's lap. Listen, this is the part that matters. This is the part that explains everything that came before and everything that came after. Dean walked out on stage for the second half, and the applause started before he even reached the microphone. He picked it up, waited for the noise to die down, and said, "Thank you. We're going to do a few more songs, and then we're going to raise some money for kids who need it, and then we're all going to go home feeling like we did something that mattered. Sound good?" The room erupted. Dean smiled. Not the showman's smile, not the practiced one, but something real that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. He looked at the conductor. "Let's do that some more." The orchestra launched into it. Dean sang it straight. No funny voices, no playing to the crowd, just the song. Clean and true, the way it was written. When he got to the chorus, the little girl in the wheelchair started moving. Her mother noticed first, then the woman at the next table. Then Wayne. The girl was rocking, just slightly, side to side, in time with the music. Her hands were pressed against her chest again, right over her heart, and her eyes were closed. Dean saw it. You could tell because his voice got softer for just one line, like he was singing directly to her and didn't want anyone else to hear. He made it through 4 more songs. The crowd ate it up. By the time he finished with Ain't That a Kick in the Head, people were on their feet again. The MC came back out and started the auction. Dean slipped backstage and out the side door to the parking lot. He needed air. Sinatra and Wayne found him leaning against the brick wall, smoking another cigarette. "You ducking out?" Sinatra asked. "Just getting some air." Wayne pulled out his own pack and lit one up. "That kid's still in there. She keeps looking at the stage." Dean didn't say anything. "You changed her life tonight," Wayne said. "You know that, right? I sang some songs." "Stop it," Sinatra said. Sharp. Not angry, but firm. "You did more than that, and you know it. Don't cheapen it by pretending it was nothing." Dean looked at him. Sinatra's face was hard. Wayne's too. both of them staring at him like they were trying to make him understand something he was refusing to see. Every performer's nightmare, Dean finally said. Someone in the crowd breaks down and you have to choose between the show and the person. I always figured I'd pick the show. But you didn't, Wayne said. No, why not? Dean took a long drag, let the smoke out slow. Because the show didn't matter as much as I thought it did. Silence. A car horn honked somewhere out on Wilshire Boulevard. Inside, the auction was getting loud. Someone had just bid $15,000 on a weekend in Palm Springs. Listen to what Dean says next, because this is the moment he realizes what that night cost him and what it gave him in return. You think she'll remember this? Dean asked. The kid? Sinatra said. Yeah, for the rest of her life. Dean nodded, dropped the cigarette, stepped on it. Then it was worth it. They went back inside together. The auction was wrapping up. The little girl and her mother were getting ready to leave. Dean watched from the wings as they made their way to the exit. The mother had her purse over one shoulder, and she was pushing the wheelchair with both hands. The girl was holding Mr. Cotton and looking back over her shoulder at the stage. Dean stepped out, not onto the stage, just into view. The girl saw him. Her face lit up. She raised one hand, not high, not straight, but up, and waved. Dean waved back. The mother smiled, mouthed, "Thank you." Dean nodded. They left through the side door, gone. Just like that. The MC announced the final total, $247,000 raised for the Children's Hospital. The room cheered. People started gathering their coats and saying their goodbyes. Sinatra and Wayne came back to find Dean. You did good tonight, Wayne said. Thanks. You want to get a real drink? Sinatra asked. Yeah. They walked out together into the cool Los Angeles night. The valet brought their cars around. Dean tipped him a 20. They drove to a bar on La Cienega that stayed open late and didn't care who you were. They sat in a booth in the back and drank until 2 in the morning, talking about nothing and everything. 3 men in tuxedos who'd just witnessed something none of them could quite put into words. Remember what I said at the beginning about Dean running from a choice? Watch what he carries with him after tonight, because that's where the real story lives. Years later, people would ask Dean about that night. He'd usually shrug it off, say it was just another show. But once, late at night, after too many drinks, he told a reporter, I think about that little girl sometimes. Wonder if she's okay. Wonder if she remembers. And then I think, maybe it doesn't matter if she remembers. Maybe what matters is I do. The reporter asked what he remembered most. The way she waved when she left. Dean said, like she was saying goodbye to someone she'd known her whole life. I'd never met her before that night. But for those few minutes, I knew her. And she knew me, the real me. Not the guy on stage, the guy who was just as scared as she was. He paused, swirling the ice in his glass. Turns out that guy was worth more than the persona ever was. Took me 46 years and a crying kid in a wheelchair to figure that out. If you enjoyed spending this time here, I'd be grateful if you'd consider subscribing. A simple like also helps more than you'd think. The little girl's name was Sarah. Her mother sent Dean a letter 3 weeks later. It said Sarah talked about him every day, that she'd started trying harder in her physical therapy, because Dean had told her that shaking meant you cared, that she wanted to care as much as he did. The letter explained what Dean had sensed but hadn't fully understood that night. Sarah's hands didn't work because of cerebral palsy, and every day she watched other kids do things she couldn't, and that night she'd broken down because she couldn't even applaud for the man who'd made her smile. But now she was trying, really trying, because of him. Dean kept that letter in his wallet until the day he died. And if you want to know what really happened the next time Frank and Duke saw Dean freeze on stage, tell me in the comments.